Hey champs of Examsnet, welcome back to another session of human physiology. Today we will start the new chapter, that is locomotion and movement. So what is movement? Any type of motion is known as movement. For example, when I'm speaking, my lips are moving, my tongue is moving. When I'm blinking, my eyelids are moving, and when I'm writing, my hand is moving. So all these are types of movement. But during these movement, is the position of my body changed? No, I am sitting at the same place. My position is not changed. That means all these were examples of simple movement. Okay, simple movement. Whereas if I get up from this place and go somewhere else, it will be a special type of movement, that is locomotion. So what is locomotion? It is a special type of movement which leads to the change in the position or location. Okay. So we can see that locomotion and the movement, these two terms are related to each other. All the locomotion are movement, but not all the movements are locomotion. Okay. Also, there are some parts in the organisms which can perform dual function. Okay. They can help in the simple movement as well as in the locomotion. For example, you remember the organism called paramecium. Paramecium. So what is the characteristic feature of the paramecium? The presence of cilia. Now, what is the function of cilia? It can help in the movement. Now, which type of movement? So first of all, it can help in the movement of food through the cytopharynx. That is an example of simple movement. And at the same time, it can also help in the locomotion. That means movement of the paramecium from one place to another. Okay, so it is performing dual function. Similarly, the tentacles which are present in the hydra, on the surface of the hydra, so it also performs dual function. It can help in the capture of prey. That is a type of simple movement, because during the capture of prey it can remain on its own position. It should not move from one place to another. And then it can also help in the locomotion. So tentacles present on the surface of hydra are also able to perform dual function, simple movement as well as locomotion. So we can see that the terms locomotion and movement are related to each other because they can be performed by the same organs or same parts. Okay, also the locomotion is a special type of movement, so we need to study these two terms together in one chapter, not separately. Okay, now let's start with the types of movement. So we are studying human physiology. So we will study the types of movement in humans. Okay. So first type of movement that we have to study is the amoeboid movement. Now what is amoeboid movement? As it is clear from the name that it is related to amoeba. That means this type of movement will be same as the movement in amoeba. So how does an amoeba move? With the help of pseudopodia, right? That is the false feet. So how does the pseudopodia is formed? It is formed by the streaming of the protoplasm, right? So similar type of pseudopodia are also formed in these amoeboid cells which are present in our body. Okay, so streaming of the protoplasm leads to the formation of pseudopodia, and then these pseudopodia can help in the movement of these cells. The examples of such cells are macrophages, then leukocytes, that is the white blood cells, and also some cytoskeletal elements like microfilaments. So all these are example of amoeboid cells. That means the movement in them will be amoeboid type of movement, that is with the help of pseudopodia, and pseudopodia will be formed by streaming of the protoplasm, right? Now the second type of movement is ciliary movement. So just now we have discussed about the cilia that is present on the body of the paramecium. So what is the function of the cilia? Again, the movement. So similar type of cilia are also present in some parts of our body. So where they are present in the internal tubular organs which are lined by ciliated epithelium. So the internal tubular organs of our body are lined by the ciliary epithelium. That means the epithelium consists of a large number of cilia, and obviously the function of the cilia will be the movement, because the coordinated movement of the cilia helps in the movement of particles, right, from one place to another. Example will be trachea. Okay, our trachea. So what is the function? Removal of the dust particles and foreign substances is done by the cilia present in the trachea. Then the ciliated epithelium are also present in the fallopian tubes, where it helps in the movement of the ova, that is the female gamete. Female gamete. So the cilia can also help in the movement of the gametes in the reproductive tract. And the third type of movement is the muscular movement that leads to locomotion. Okay, so in muscular movements, the muscles of our body will be involved, like the muscles of the limbs, the muscles of the jaws, tongue, etc. All these things are made up of muscles. Okay, and the muscles of our body have a contractile property. That means they can contract and relax. They have a property of contraction and relaxation, and it is this property of the muscle, contraction and relaxation, which helps in the locomotion, movement from one place to another. If the muscles will not contract, then they cannot help in the movement. Okay, so locomotion can be done by the uh, muscular movement. Okay, so the muscular movement of our body leads to the locomotion. So when I have to get up from here and go somewhere else, I will have to use the muscles of my body. Okay, like the muscles of the legs, muscle of the body. Okay, but the locomotion cannot be done simply or only by the muscles. Okay, it also involves the neural system. That means I will think before going somewhere. Okay, so my nervous system is also working there. Okay, it's not that it's not in my control, it's this locomotion is in my control. I will move from here to somewhere else only if I want to move, right? At the same time, the skeletal system is also important, because during the movement, only the muscles are not moving. The bones which are associated with the muscles are also moving. Okay, our legs and hands contain the bones as well. Okay, these muscles are attached to the bones. Similarly, the whole body posture is made up of the skeleton, right? So the skeletal system is also involved in the locomotion. So locomotion is due to the coordinated activity of the muscular system, the skeletal system, and the neural system. All these three things have to be working in a coordinated manner for locomotion to take place. If any one of them is not working, then locomotion cannot be done. If I want my muscle to go somewhere and I don't want my bones to go somewhere else, then it cannot happen, right? So it should be the coordinated activity of the muscular system, the skeletal system, and the neural system. All the three systems should be involved. So now let's study in detail about the muscle, right? Because out of the above types of movement, the only type of movement which leads to locomotion is the muscular movement, right? So we have to focus on the muscles and the bones which are associated to it. So first we will discuss about the muscle, and then we will discuss about the bones. So let's start with the muscle. Here we will see the characteristics of the muscle as well as the mechanism of the contraction of the muscle, because we know that it is ultimately the contraction of the muscle which leads to the locomotion. So contraction of the muscle is very important part. Contraction of muscle, we will come to it. First, let's see the characteristics of the muscle. So muscle is having the mesodermal origin. So you would have studied in the chapter structural organization in animals that we have three types of embryonic layers. Okay, ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm, right? So out of these three embryonic layers, the muscle is developed or originated from which embryonic layer? It is originated from the mesoderm. Therefore we say that it is having a mesodermal origin. Okay, and it contributes around 40 to 50% of the body weight. So 50 to or around half of the body weight is contributed by the muscles. Okay, what are the properties of the muscles? Excitability, it can get excited. Contractility, it can contract and relax. Extensibility, it can be extended. And elasticity, okay, it is flexible. The muscles are quite flexible. And the types of muscles on the basis of location. So the muscles can be classified on various bases, but here we will study the classification of muscle on the basis of the location where they are located in our body. So on the basis of the location, there are three main types of muscles: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscles. Okay, where are skeletal muscles present? These are associated with the skeletal system of our body. Okay, so first let's discuss about the skeletal muscle. So these muscles are striated. That means if you observe the muscle cell or muscle fiber, skeletal muscle fiber under the microscope, you will see a striped appearance. Shape is cylindrical or tubular. Okay, so the shape of the muscle fiber is tubular or cylindrical, and if you observe them under microscope, stripes will be present. Okay, stripes. Therefore, these muscle fibers are known as striated muscle fibers. Okay, these muscles are striated. The skeletal muscles are striated muscles because they have stripes all over their surface, right? And tubular because they are cylindrical in shape. And multinucleated, that means each muscle fiber will consist of more than one nuclei. Okay, so these are multinucleated. These are voluntary because the activity of the skeletal muscle are under direct control of our neural system. So if we want to move, then only we will move. Okay, it is under our control or under the control of our nervous system. Therefore, these are voluntary muscles, and these are usually attached to the skeleton. Okay, so you can see the diagrams here. You can clearly see that these are cylindrical in shape and they are having many nuclei in one cell. Okay, so one fiber means one cell because the shape of the cell is like fiber, therefore it is known as fiber. Okay, but each muscle fiber is one cell, muscle cell, and each muscle cell consists of more than one nuclei, therefore it is multinucleated. Okay. Now the second type of muscle is smooth muscle. Smooth muscles are non-striated. That means if you observe the smooth muscles under the microscope, you will not observe the stripes on their surface. So these are non-striated. Okay, and these are spindle shaped. Spindle shaped. The skeletal muscles were cylindrical or tubular in shape, whereas the smooth muscles are spindle shaped like this. Okay, like this, spindle shaped. Got it? And these are uninucleated. That means in one muscle cell or in one muscle fiber, there will be only one nucleus, right? So you can see the differences between the skeletal muscle and the smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle was cylindrical in shape, whereas the smooth muscle is spindle shaped. The skeletal muscle was striated, whereas the smooth muscle is unstriated or non-striated. The skeletal muscle was multinucleated and the smooth muscle is uninucleated. So you can write down the differences among them. The fourth difference is that the skeletal muscles are voluntary muscle. We can control its activity or the nervous system controls its movement, whereas the smooth muscles are involuntary muscles. The nervous system does not control it. That means we cannot control the movement of the smooth muscle. Okay, although every movement in our body is under the control of nervous system either directly or indirectly. So the movement of smooth muscle is not under direct control of the nervous system, it is an indirect control, whereas the skeletal muscles movement is under direct control. We know when to move and how to move, but we do not know when to move our smooth muscles. Okay, therefore it is said that the smooth muscles are involuntary, and these are usually present in the inner hollow organs of our body or visceral organs of our body. Therefore, these muscles are also known as visceral muscles. Okay. What are the examples of the organs? The examples can be alimentary canal. Okay, here you can see alimentary canal is shown. The alimentary canal consists of the stomach, small intestine, large intestine. So you do not control when to move the food from stomach to small intestine or from small intestine to large intestine, right? All these movements are not under direct control, under our direct control. Therefore, these are involuntary muscles, right? And then the third type of muscle is the cardiac muscle. Obviously, it is clear from the name that the cardiac muscles are present in the heart. Okay, so again, these are striated like the skeletal muscle, and these are branched. So many muscle fibers are together forming a branched network. Okay, so only the cardiac muscles are branched, and these are uninucleated like the smooth muscle. So one characteristic of the cardiac muscle that is same as the skeletal muscle is that both are striated, and one characteristic of the cardiac muscle that is same as the smooth muscle is that both are uninucleated. Okay, so cardiac muscle has some characteristic of the skeletal muscle and some characteristic of the smooth muscle, and these are also involuntary like the smooth muscles. We cannot control when our heart will beat, right? So heartbeat is not under our control, so obviously this is involuntary. And then these are present only in the walls of the heart, not anywhere else in the body. Okay, So now we will focus on the skeletal muscle. Why? Because out of all these three types of muscle, the skeletal muscle, smooth muscle and the cardiac muscle, the only muscle that helps in locomotion, that means in changing our position from one place to another, is the skeletal muscle. Okay. So we will focus on the skeletal muscle because in this chapter we are focusing on the locomotion, right? So let's start. Each organized skeletal muscle of our body is made up of a large number of bundles. Okay. So suppose this is one muscle. This is one muscle. So how is this muscle formed? It is formed by a large number of muscle bundles like this. This is one bundle. This is another bundle. This is another bundle. So when a large number of muscle bundles come together, they form the organized muscle. Okay. So muscle bundles, and these muscle bundles are known as fascicles. Okay. And how are all these muscle bundles joined together? So these are joined together with the help of a common collagenous connective tissue. Collagenous connective tissue. Okay. So this tissue joins a large number of muscle bundles together to form the organized muscle. Got it? And how are these muscle bundles formed? So these muscle bundles are again formed by a large number of fibers, muscle fibers or muscle cell. Okay. So muscle fiber is a muscle cell. That means the muscle cell will also consist of a cell membrane, cytoplasm and the organelles like any other cell, right? So this muscle fiber also consists of a cell membrane called sarcolemma. So the cell membrane of the muscle fiber is known as sarcolemma. Okay, cell membrane. The cytoplasm of the muscle cell is known as sarcoplasm, not cytoplasm, but sarcoplasm. So whenever we use the word sarco, it means we are talking about the muscles. Okay. So the cell membrane of the muscle fiber is known as sarcolemma. The cytoplasm of the cell membrane of the muscle fiber is known as sarcoplasm, and the organelle, that is endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, is known as sarcoplasmic reticulum. So here we have to use the word sarco. Okay, so sarcolemma means plasma membrane of the muscle fiber, sarcoplasmic reticulum means endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, and the sarcoplasm means the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber. Now here you have to remember one thing about the muscle fiber of the or the muscle cell, that these are syncytium. Syncytium means multinucleated. So just now we have studied about the differences between the skeletal muscle, smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. We saw that the skeletal muscle was multinucleated. That means each muscle cell or muscle fiber consists of more than one nucleus. So this is, therefore these are known to be syncytium. Okay, syncytium means more than one nucleus per cell is present. Okay. Now, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is the endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, is the storehouse of calcium ions. So a large number of calcium ions are stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now you have to remember this because calcium ions will play a very important role in the contraction of the muscle. We will see how. Okay. And now let's come to the sarcoplasm, that is the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber. So these sarcoplasm again consist of a large number of thin filaments called myofilaments or myofibrils. Okay, so we have to study in detail about the myofibrils. Okay, so let's revise. We have seen that each organized muscle of our body is made up of a large number of muscle bundle called fascicle. Okay, and the fascicles are joined together by a common collagenous connective tissue called fascia. Okay, if I have not mentioned it, let me write it down here. So this collagenous connective tissue which connects many muscle bundles together is known as fascia, and therefore the muscle bundles are known as fascicles. Okay, and these muscle bundles are again formed by a large number of muscle fibers or muscle cells, and each muscle cell or the muscle fiber consists of plasma membrane called sarcolemma, cytoplasm called sarcoplasm, and endoplasmic reticulum called sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is the storehouse of calcium ion which will play a very important role in the contraction of the muscle, and the sarcoplasm is contains a large number of thin filaments called myofilaments or myofibrils. So now we have to study in detail about the myofibrils. Okay. First, let's have a look at the muscle. Okay, this is the diagram of a muscle. So you can see these circular, the large circular parts, this circular one. Okay, let me change the color here. I will take the red color. Okay, so in red color, you can see this large oval part, then again this large oval part, and again, you can see these large oval portions which contain small pink oval shapes. So this large oval shape is the fascicle. Okay, fascicle or muscle bundle. And the pink color oval shapes which are present inside these larger oval shapes are the muscle fibers. Okay, these are the muscle cells or muscle fibers which form the muscle bundle. Okay, and this is sarcolemma, and they can be, and you can see the large number of blood capillaries are also present. Okay, now let's move further. Now we have seen that in the sarcoplasm, that is the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber, a large number of thin filaments called myofibrils are present, right? And these myofibrils have gives this striated appearance to the muscle. Okay, striated appearance of the muscle fiber is due to the distribution pattern of two proteins. Okay, so the myofibril gives the striated appearance to the muscle fiber, right? Because of the presence of two proteins. So two proteins are present in the myofibrils. One is actin and the other is myosin. So let's discuss about these proteins. Now these two proteins are arranged as rod-like structures parallel to each other and also parallel to the longitudinal axis of the myofibril. For example, if this is the myofibril, suppose this is the myofibril. This is the longitudinal axis from point A to point B. This is the longitudinal axis. So in yellow color, I am showing the actin protein. Okay, actin protein. So you can see these actin proteins are parallel to each other. And these are also parallel to the longitudinal axis. And also the myosin, the other protein that I will show in red color. It is present again in parallel to each other and parallel to the longitudinal axis of the muscle fiber. Okay, so you can see, and another difference that you can see is the actins are thinner than the myosin. Okay, so these are arranged parallel to each other as well as parallel to the longitudinal axis of the myofibrils. Okay, so now let's discuss in detail about the myofibril. Myofibril consists of two types of protein, actin and myosin, that we have seen. And if you observe the myofibril under the microscope, you will see two types of bands, okay, light bands and dark bands. So light bands and dark bands are present in the myofibrils. Okay, and the light band is known as I band or isotropic band, isotropic, whereas the A band, dark band, is known as A band or anisotropic band. Okay, so if you look at the myofibril under microscope, you will observe two types of bands, light band and dark band. The light band is also known as I band or isotropic band, and the dark band is also known as A band or anisotropic band. Okay. And why the light band appears to be light? Because of the presence of the actin protein. Because the actin proteins will give the appearance, give a very light appearance to the band. Okay, these are also known as thin filaments. Thin filaments. And the dark band consists of thick filament called myosin. Okay, so myosin will give thicker appearance or darker appearance, right? Therefore, it is known as dark band. Now I will show you the diagram. So let me make it easy for you. You have to remember one thing, that the light band or the actin filaments are bisected by Z line. Okay, Z line are elastic fibers. So these are bisected by the thin elastic fibers known as Z line. So suppose this is the actins or the thin filaments or the I band. Okay, so this is I band or thin filament. In between this band, you will see a thin straight line. So that straight line in between this band that divides the band into two equal parts is known as Z line. Okay. Similarly, in the dark band that I will show you in red color. Okay. So here you can see this is the myosin, the dark band. So this will also be bisected in between. Bisected means dividing it into two equal parts. Okay. Bisected by a fibrous membrane, thin fibrous membrane called M line. Okay. So you will remember the difference between the Z line and the M line. Z line is the thin elastic fiber that bisects the I band, and the M line is the thin fibrous membrane which bisects the A band. Okay. So I will show you the diagram. And these two are present alternately. Actin and filaments are present alternately. That means first actin, then actin and myosin. Okay, actin, then myosin, then actin, then myosin, like this. Actin, sorry, this is in red color we have myosin, right? So in yellow color we have actin. So suppose this is actin, then we will have myosin. Myosin. Then again we will have actin, and then again myosin. Okay, so these are present in alternate pattern. First you will see the band of actin, then the myosin, then actin, then myosin. Okay, now a very important term, that is sarcomere. Sarcomere is the functional unit of the contraction, and it is the portion of the myofibril between two successive Z lines. So what are Z lines? Just now we have discussed that it is the thin elastic fiber that bisects the I band, right? So the portion between the two Z lines is known as sarcomere, and this is the functional unit of contraction. Okay. So can you see this microscopic view of the myofibril? This is the microscopic view of the myofibril. Here you can see two types of color, this upper figure. Okay, this is the upper figure, number 1, and the lower figure is number 2. So look at the upper figure first. You can see light color and dark color. So in light color, we have I band that is made up of actin filament, and in dark color, we have A band that is made up of the myosin filament. Okay. Now look at the light colored band that is made up of actin filaments. In between the light colored band, you can see a dark colored line, straight line that is dividing it into two parts. So this line is the Z line. Similarly, on the right hand side also, in between the light band, you can see a straight dark colored line that is Z line. So the portion between these two Z lines is known as sarcomere. Okay, and this is the functional unit of contraction, and the lower diagram shows you the detailed structure. Okay, so here you can see, again you can see two types of bands here, the light band and the dark band. In the light, in the pinkish color or the light red color, we have the I band, and in the dark red color we have the A band. Okay, so the line that is bisecting the I band is known as Z line, again in black color. It is shown in the black color on the left side as well as on the right side, and the portion between these two Z lines is the sarcomere. Okay, another thing that you can see here, that this dark red color parts parallel to each other, these are myosin. Okay, so both the ends of the myosin or both the ends of the A band are overlapped, partially overlapped by the I band. Can you see this? Both the ends, this end and this end, both the ends of the A band are overlapped by the I band, and just the middle portion is not overlapped. So the middle portion of the myosin or the A band which is not overlapped by the I band is known as H zone. So what is H zone? It is the middle portion of the myosin filaments or middle portion of the A band which is not overlapped by the I band or actin filaments. Okay, I hope you have understood this. I will also show you a video after which things will be very clear to you. Okay. So now let's see what happens when the fiber muscle cell or muscle fiber is in a resting phase. So what happens during the resting phase? The free ends of the myosin are partially overlapped by the actins. Okay, so myosin are thick filaments like this. This is myosin. Again, this is myosin, the thick filament. So here we have the myosin. So this is the A band, right? A band. And on both the sides, the free ends are overlapped by the actins like this. So on the left side, it has I band, and on the right side also it has I bands. So the A band is overlapped, partially overlapped by the I bands on both the sides. This is what happens during the resting phase of the muscle. And H zone, what is H zone? I have already explained, the central part of the thick filaments which are not overlapped by the thin filaments. So the central part from here to here, which is not overlapped by the actins or the thin filament, is known as H zone. Now let's see the structure of the contractile protein. So what are the contractile proteins? Two proteins are there, actin and myosin, right? Actin, that is the thin filament, and the myosin, which are thick filaments. Thick filaments. So let's first discuss about the actins. Now actins are again not a very simple protein. These are also made up of many proteins. For example, G protein, globular. So what is globular protein? It is a monomer. It is the monomer of the polymer filamentous protein. Okay. So we know that when some unit is repeated many times to form a sequence like structure, then it is known as polymer. Okay. So suppose this is a polymer. These circular parts you can see, these circular portions are the monomers. Each of these circles are monomers. And when they are repeating in a sequence, then it forms the polymer, right? This is the basic thing you should already know. So the each of the monomer of the actin filament is known as globular protein. So each monomer is known as globular protein or G protein. And when these globular proteins are repeated many times to form a polymer, then they are known as filamentous or F actins. Okay, so each monomer is known as G actin or globular actin, and each polymer is known as filamentous actin or F actin. Okay, now there are two more proteins or two additional proteins which are involved with the actin, and these are troponin and tropomyosin. Okay, so troponin and tropomyosin are also very important. First of all, you have to remember that in one actin filament, the two filamentous actins form a helical structure, right? So suppose this is, okay, let me come back to there. So this is one polymer, one more polymer will be there, and they will bind around each other forming a helical structure like this. So this is one F actin and this is another F actin. They are forming a helix, right? And then there is another protein called tropomyosin, which is also filamentous. It is also like filament. So it will again move throughout the length of the filamentous actin. Okay. So there will be an additional protein called tropomyosin, which will run parallel to the F actin. Okay. And then one more protein called troponin will be present at regular intervals, and these will be three in number. At one place there will be three units of troponin, so they will be present like this: 1, 2 and 3. Okay, and then again at some interval there will be three subunits of troponin. Got it? You will understand it better after looking at the diagrams. So two F actins, that means the two filamentous actins, which are the polymers of the globular actins, are helically wound to each other like this, right? Then two filaments of tropomyosin run close to the F actins throughout its length. Okay. And troponin, what is troponin? It is another protein which is distributed at regular intervals on the tropomyosin. So these troponins will be present on the tropomyosin at regular intervals. And how many subunits of the troponin will be present at one place? 3 subunits. So 1, 2 and 3. Okay. Out of these 3 subunits, only one will be present on the surface of the tropomyosin. So this is tropomyosin. Tropomyosin. On its surface, one of the subunits will be present and 2 subunits will be above it. Okay. And during the resting phase of the muscle, active binding site on the actin is masked by a subunit of the troponin. So let's understand this by looking at the diagram. So can you see this diagram? This is from the NCERT. The upper diagram shows you the actin and the lower diagram shows you the myosin, the monomer of myosin, that is meromyosin. Meromyosin. So right now we have discussed that actin is a polymeric form, right? Its monomer is globular actin and the polymer is F-actin or the filamentous actin. Similarly, the myosin is also a polymerized form. Okay. What is the monomer of the myosin? It is the meromyosin. Okay. So the myosin is made up of the monomer called meromyosin. So here on the lower figure is the meromyosin. Okay. So first we will discuss the upper figure, that is the actin. So here you can see green colored circular structures are there. Okay. Many green colored circular structures are repeated to form a polymer. So each of these circular portions is a globular protein or G protein. Okay. And when they are polymerized to form a thread-like structure, then this polymerized form is the filamentous actin or F-actin. Okay. So in green color part in the upper diagram, the green colored portion is the F-actin or the filamentous actin. In red color also you can see a rope-like structure which is running parallel to the F-actin. Okay, it is running throughout the length of the actin and it is running very close to the filamentous actin. So this red color rope-like structure is the tropomyosin. Here you can see it is already labeled tropomyosin. So what is the actin? What is the difference between the actin or the filamentous actin and the tropomyosin? The tropomyosin is another protein which is filamentous and it is running close to the filamentous actin throughout the length of the actin. Okay. And on the surface of the tropomyosin, there is another protein called troponin, which is present at regular intervals. Okay, it is not present continuously, it is present at regular intervals. So one troponin here, another troponin here, another troponin here. So three, the troponin is shown at 3 places at regular intervals, right? And at each place you can see there are 3 subunits of the troponin. Okay, 3 small red color structures you can see like this. And out of these 3, only one is present on the surface of the tropomyosin. The other 2 are not present on the surface. Okay. So what is the role of this subunit of troponin which is present on the surface of tropomyosin? So it is basically masking the active site because the actin has to bind with myosin for the contraction of the muscle. So now this is the resting phase. That means there is no binding between the actin and the myosin. Okay, and why there is no binding between the actin and the myosin? Because the site on the actin which has to bind with the myosin is covered or masked by the subunit of the troponin. Okay, so since that actin and the myosin have to bind with each other, therefore there should be a site on the actin where it will bind with the myosin, and also there should be a site on the myosin where it will bind with the actin. Okay, so suppose this is actin, right? And this is myosin, so obviously they have to bind to each other. So there will be one site on the actin and one site on the myosin where binding will take place. Okay. So the site on the actin where binding has to take place is covered by the troponin. So the binding will only take place when this place will get exposed, when this site will get exposed, and this site will get exposed only if the troponin is removed from that site. Okay. So we will see how this troponin will be removed or distracted from its site. Okay. First, let's have a look at the structure of the meromyosin, which is the monomer of the myosin. So here you can see it has two parts. This side on the right side, globular head and a short arm. Okay, and on this side you can see there's a tail, long tail. Okay, so head and arm part on the right side, and on the left side it has a tail. Okay, and in addition you can see that on the head region there is an actin binding site. So this is the site at which it will bind with the actin, and there is also an ATP binding site. That means it will also bind with an ATP. So it also has to bind with ATP. Why it will bind with ATP, that also we will see. So what is written here, let's see. Myosin is also a polymerized form like the actin. The monomer of the myosin is known as meromyosin. We have just now seen the diagram of the meromyosin. You can see that the meromyosin has two parts. One part is the head along with the arm, and the other part is the tail. Okay, so the head along with the short arm is known as heavy meromyosin, and the tail part is known as light meromyosin. Okay. Now the head and short arm projects outwards at regular distance and angle from the surface of the polymerized myosin. So let me show you. Suppose this is one myosin. Can you see? This is meromyosin. Okay, that is the monomer of the myosin. So this is head and arm, and this side we have the tail. So this is the monomer. So many such monomers have to repeat many times to form the polymer, right? So this is one monomer, then there is another monomer, tail, head and arm. Again, tail, head and arm, tail, head and arm. So many such monomers will repeat many times to form the polymer. So now this is the polymer called myosin. Now you can see that the tails are located along the surface, but the heads are coming outwards. Okay, so the heads are projecting outwards from the surface, making certain angle. Okay, so this is what it is written. Projects, the head part projects outwards at regular intervals and angle from the surface of the polymerized myosin. Okay, now we will see the mechanism of the muscle contraction. So the mechanism of the muscle contraction is well explained by a theory called sliding filament theory. Okay, so sliding filament theory is related to the contraction of the muscles. So let's see how the muscle gets contracted. The contraction of the muscle is initiated or started by the sliding of the thin filaments over the thick filaments according to this theory. Okay, so according to the sliding filament theory, as it is clear from the name, the filaments will slide. Okay, so how many filaments are there? Two types of filaments: thin filaments, that is actin, and thick filaments, that is myosin. So this is the thick filament, and on both the sides we have thin filaments. So thin filaments are overlapping the thick filaments on both the sides partially, and the middle portion is not overlapped. This portion is known as H zone. This much is clear to you. Now, when on both sides the thin filaments will start sliding towards each other. So suppose this side we have point A, this side we have point B. So when the thin filaments on side A will start moving towards side B, and the thin filaments towards side B will start moving towards side A. So that means the thin filaments on both the sides will start moving towards each other. So it will lead to the contraction of the muscle according to this theory. Okay, now what will happen if they are sliding towards each other? The middle portion, which was not overlapped, will get reduced, right? So if this is the H zone, which is not overlapped by the thin filaments, the thin filaments start moving towards each other, then this H zone will get reduced, right? So this is what happens during the contraction of the muscle. And we know that the involvement of central nervous system is important here. So it will start when the central nervous system will send a signal. Okay, it will send a motor signal through the motor neuron. Okay, a signal is sent by the central nervous system through the motor neuron, and this signal will reach the neuromuscular junction. So what is the role of the motor neuron? It will act as the road. Okay, just like the road. Suppose you have to go from school to home or home to school, then there should be one connectivity through which you will move from school to home or home to school, right? And that connectivity is road, right? So here the role of the motor neuron is just like the road. So it will carry the signal from the central nervous system to the muscle. Now since it has to carry the signal from the brain to the muscle, therefore it should be connected to both the brain as well as to the muscle. So on one side the neuron will be connected to the brain or the central nervous system, and on the other side it will be connected at the muscle. Okay, it is not just one neuron but a sequence of neuron that will be forming the bridge, okay, for the passage of signals. So the neuron will start carrying the signal from the central nervous system. They will carry it towards the junction, the point at which they are connected with the muscle. So this point is known as neuromuscular junction. What is neuromuscular junction? The point at which the neuron and the muscles meet. Okay, so that is the point where they will deliver that message or the signal. Okay, so this point is neuromuscular junction, which is also known as motor end plate. Okay, so now the signal which had started from the central nervous system will reach at the neuromuscular junction. Now what will happen when the signal will reach at this point? At this time, some transmitters or neurotransmitters will be released at the neuromuscular junction, and these neurotransmitters are acetylcholine. Okay, so what are the neurotransmitters here? Acetylcholine. So they will get released, and this will lead to the generation of action potential in the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma is the plasma membrane or the cell membrane of the muscle fiber. Okay. So suppose this is the muscle fiber. This is the neuromuscular junction, that is the point at which the neurons are connected to the muscle. So they will carry the signal from here, central nervous system, towards this junction. Now the signal is reached at the neuromuscular junction. It will lead to the release of the neurotransmitters called acetylcholine, which will generate action potential in the plasma membrane or the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma is nothing but the plasma membrane. So an action potential will be generated at this point at the cell membrane, and then this action potential will spread throughout the muscle fiber. Okay, and this spread of the action potential will lead to the release of the calcium ion into the sarcoplasm. So if you remember, we have discussed that the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is nothing but the endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, is the storehouse of the calcium ion. We have already discussed this. Is the storehouse of the calcium ion. So now you have to understand what is the importance of the calcium ion. We have discussed that calcium ion plays a very important role in the contraction of the muscle. So now these calcium ions which were stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum will be released. A large number of calcium ion will be released into the cytoplasm or the sarcoplasm. So these calcium ions will now spread throughout the muscle fibers. Okay, they will be present throughout the muscle fiber or the cell, and this will lead to the binding of the calcium ion with the subunit of troponin, which was masking the active site for myosin. Okay, so let me recapitulate the things which we have already discussed. First of all, we have discussed that the monomer of the actins are globular proteins called G proteins. Okay, so suppose this is one G proteins. Now many such G proteins form a polymer called filamentous protein or F protein. Okay, and then this is one F actin or F protein, and two such F actins will form helical structure by bonding around each other. Okay, so they will form a helical structure like this. Now on the F actins, there will be another protein called tropomyosin, which is again a rope-like structure which will run close to the F actin throughout the length. Okay, and on that tropomyosin, let me show the tropomyosin in red color. So there is a tropomyosin which is running close to the F actin throughout the length. In red color, we have the tropomyosin. On the surface of the tropomyosin, we have subunits of troponin. There is another protein called troponin, which is in the form of subunit. It has 3 subunits at one place. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, again at some interval there will be 3 subunits, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like this on the surface of the tropomyosin. So you can see red colored rope like structures, tropomyosin. On the regular interval there will be troponin. So 3 subunits of troponins are present. Out of these 3 subunits, only one subunit is touching the surface of the tropomyosin, right? So it is touching the tropomyosin at the site where there is a binding site for myosin. So this site is the binding site for myosin. At this site, the myosin have to bind with the actin. But right now, this site is masked or covered by the troponin, by the subunit of the troponin. So when these two have to bind, the actin and myosin have to bind, this troponin should be distracted from here. So who will distract this troponin, the subunit of troponin? It will be distracted by the calcium ion. So calcium ion will come and bind with this subunit. So now the subunit of troponin will get busy with the calcium ion, and this site which it was masking will get exposed. Okay. So you can understand this by an example. Suppose I have asked you to remain at your door and do not allow the entry of any person. Okay, you are standing at your door. You are troponin. You are the subunit of the troponin. Okay, so you are 3 friends. These are 3 subunits of the troponin. Out of the 3 friends, only one friend is covering the door. Okay, is standing just in front of the door so that nobody can enter into the house. Okay, but someone else comes and distract you from here, and they say that let's play. Okay, so someone comes and you start playing with them, so the part of the door which you were covering will now get exposed. Okay, so now anyone can enter through it. Similar thing happens here. The troponin are present to mask the active site for myosin. So when this troponin will get busy with the calcium ion, when the calcium ion will bind with this, it will get distracted from here and that site will get exposed. Now the myosin can easily bind at this site. Got it? Now here you can see this figure shows you the sliding filament theory through the diagram. So you can see 4 small figures here. This is figure number 1, this is figure number 2, this is figure number 3, and this is figure number 4. Okay, so on the top side we have figure number 1. What do you see here? On the top we have actin filament, on the bottom we have myosin filament. Okay, I'm talking about this one. So actin filament and lower side is myosin filament. Now these two are not bound to each other. These are not bound. So what will happen? We have seen that the myosin contains an actin binding site as well as an ATP binding site. So what is the role of ATP here? It will hydrolyze the ATP. Okay, ATP hydrolysis will take place because in order to bind with the actin, myosin needs energy. And where will this energy come from? It will come from the hydrolysis of the ATP. Okay, so ATP will be hydrolyzed and the myosin will utilize this energy to bind with the active site on the actin. Okay, so now they will bind to each other and they will form a cross bridge. So in figure number 2, that means this one, you can see a cross bridge is formed. So what has happened? The ATP hydrolysis took place, the myosin utilized this energy and formed a cross bridge with the actin after binding to it. Okay, so this is the formation of the cross bridge. Okay, so this was about the contraction. Now when this cross bridge will form, what will happen? The sliding of the actin over the myosin filament will start taking place. Okay, so the actins on both sides of the myosin will slide towards each other. So during contraction, ATP hydrolysis will take place. The first step is the ATP hydrolysis, which will lead to the formation of the cross bridge. Okay, and during this time, actin filaments will be pulled inwards. Okay, actin filaments which were overlapping the myosin filaments will start moving towards each other. So the Z lines which are attached to it will also be pulled inwards. Okay, what are Z lines? Z lines are the small, the thin lines which are bisecting the actin filaments or the thin filaments. Okay. So the I bands will get reduced, but the A band will retain its length. Let me draw this. Suppose before contraction, this is the myosin filaments. This is the myosin filament. And on both the sides, we have actin filaments, right? So this is before contraction. After contraction, what will happen? The actin filaments will start moving towards each other. This is the H zone, the part which is not covered or overlapped by the actins. And these actins on both the sides are bisected by the Z line. So this is Z line. This side also there is Z line. So when the contraction will take place, these Z lines along with the actin filaments will start coming inwards. So what will happen? Suppose this is the myosin or the thick filaments. Now they will completely get overlapped by the actin filaments. That means the H zone will be reduced. H zone, which was wider, now will get narrower. Okay. And the Z lines have also come inwards. Okay. I hope you have understood this. I will also show you a video after which things will be very clear to you. And during relaxation, what will happen? The ADP and phosphate will be released by the myosin, because now the myosin has to unbind with the actin. So it will release the ADP and phosphate and it will bind with a new ATP. So that again the ATP can be hydrolyzed to form the cross bridge. Okay. And then the cross bridge will be broken. Okay. So let's come back to that diagram. The figure 1 and figure 2 shows you the contraction part, and these two figures 3 and 4 show you the relaxation part. You can see here in this one, you can see that ADP and phosphate are released and by sliding of the myosin, and then the cross bridge is broken after binding with a new ATP. So now the myosin will bind with a new ATP. Again, if the contraction has to take place, then again this ATP will be hydrolyzed, cross bridge will be formed, this will be contraction, and again that cross bridge will be broken by releasing the ADP and phosphate, that will be relaxation. Okay. So during the contraction, the ATP will be hydrolyzed to release the energy for the binding of actin and myosin, and it will lead to the formation of the cross bridge. And during the relaxation, the ADP and phosphate will be released back and the myosin will bind with a new ATP after breaking the cross bridge. Okay. So I hope you have understood what actually happens during the contraction and the relaxation. Now here you can see the figure. The uppermost figure, this one shows you the relaxed state. So the parts where you can see like this type of parts are showing the myosin part. Okay. So this is the myosin. Let me show you red color. Okay. So in red color, we have myosin. Okay. And these myosin are overlapped by the actins on both the sides. This is the relaxed state. Here you can see the H zone, which is not overlapped. So it will have H zone not overlapped by the actin. During the contraction, just below that figure, you will see what happens during the contraction. These actins start coming together. So now the length of the H zone is reduced. Okay. Earlier it was so thick. The H zone was thick. Now the H zone is reduced. Okay, only this much. And further contraction takes place, then there will be no H zone left because the myosin filament will be completely overlapped. So this lowest part shows you the maximal contraction when the myosin filaments are completely overlapped by the actin filaments and there is no H zone here. Okay, no H zone. So I hope you have understood this. And during relaxation, they will come back to their original position. Okay. The Z lines will come back to their original position. And the actin filaments will also come back to their original position. And this process will continue. This process will continue till the calcium ions are pumped back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, resulting in the masking of the actin filaments. Okay. So during relaxation, what will happen? The calcium ions will go back to the endoplasmic reticulum or the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So now no calcium ion will be present. So the calcium ion which was distracting the troponin has gone now. Okay. So now again the troponin will come and mask the active site. Okay. So again it cannot bind with the myosin. Right. So return of the Z lines, during this the Z lines will return to their original position, and this is known as relaxation. Okay. And the repeated activation of the muscle cells or muscle fibers can lead to the accumulation of the lactic acid due to the anaerobic oxidation of the glycogen present in the muscle. Okay. And this can result in the fatigue of the muscle. Okay. Now there is an important component called myoglobin which is present in the muscle. So what is myoglobin? It is a red colored oxygen containing pigment that is present in the muscles. Okay, so it is red in color, therefore it gives reddish appearance to the muscle. So there are two types of muscles, some muscles which contain more amount of this myoglobin and some other type of muscles contain very low quantities or amount of the myoglobin. So the muscles which contain a higher amount of the myoglobin are known as red fibers or aerobic muscles because they appear to be reddish, okay, due to high content of myoglobin. Okay, and these muscles have large number of mitochondria and they can utilize large amount of oxygen from the air for the ATP production. Okay, so these type of muscles contain large amount of mitochondria, and we know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell because the mitochondria is capable of utilizing the oxygen for ATP production, right? Therefore this type of muscle are also known as aerobic muscles. And the other type of muscles in which very low amount of myoglobin is present, they have pale appearance or whitish appearance. So they do not have reddish appearance because the amount of myoglobin is very low. So these are known as white fibers or white muscles, and they have very less amount of mitochondria in them, but the amount of sarcoplasmic reticulum or the number of sarcoplasmic reticulum in such muscle is very high. Okay, but the amount of mitochondria is low. Amount of mitochondria is low, but amount of sarcoplasmic reticulum is very high. So this was about the contraction and relaxation of the muscle. Let's have a look at the video which will show you the contraction and relaxation. Okay. Let's start the skeletal system now. What is skeletal system? We have discussed that the locomotion or the movement of body from one place to another requires coordinated activity of the skeletal system, muscular system as well as the neural system. Okay. So in addition to the muscular system or the muscles, skeletal systems are important for movement. Okay. And the skeletal system consists of a framework of bones and a few cartilages. Okay, so two important components of the skeletal system are bones and cartilages. How many bones are present in the body? Total 206 bones are present in our body. Okay, and these bones have a hard matrix because of the presence of calcium salts in it. So which type of salts are present in the bones? Calcium salts, which makes the matrix hard. On the other hand, the cartilages, which are very few in number in the body, have a pliable matrix due to the presence of the chondroitin salts. Okay, so which type of salt is present in the cartilages? Chondroitin salt, and in bones, the calcium salts. Okay, now the skeletal system can be grouped into two parts, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Okay, so the axial skeleton, that means the skeleton in the middle part of the body, the central part along the axis. Okay, that means the head, the rib cage, the middle part. Okay, whereas the appendicular skeleton consists of the side parts, that means the hands and the legs. Okay, so suppose this is the axis of the body. Along the axis we have head at the top, then we have the main body, middle part, and on the sides we have hands and legs. So the hands and the legs are part of the appendicular skeleton, whereas the middle part, that is the head part and the main trunk of our body, is part of the axial skeleton. Okay, so the axial skeleton consists of the skull at the top, and in between it has vertebral column on the back, that means on the dorsal side, dorsal or back side, sternum on the front side, ribs on the sides. Okay, so the main trunk of our body consists of vertebral column at the back, sternum at the front, and on the sides ribs. Okay, so these are part of the axial skeleton. So we will study one by one. First, we will discuss the skull. Skull, the top portion, consists of 22 bones. Okay, again it is made up of two types of bones, cranial bones and facial bones. So we know that our brain, suppose this is the brain, this brain is well protected under the hard covering known as cranium. Okay, so the hard covering that protects our brain is known as cranium, and the bones which make up this cranium are known as cranial bones. So how many cranial bones are there? 8 cranial bones are there, and 14 facial bones, the bones which are present in our facial region, faces. Okay, so total skull region consists of the cranium plus the facial bones. So cranial bones are 8 in number, facial bones are 14 in number, making up a total of 22 bones. Okay, and in addition to these bones, there are some other bones like a U-shaped bone, a single U-shaped bone that is known as hyoid bone. Okay, this is present at the base of the buccal cavity. So this bone is also present in the skull region, but it is counted separately. It is not counted as part of the skull bone. So this hyoid bone is not included in the 22 bones that we have discussed. Okay. In addition to this hyoid bone, there are some bones present inside our ear in the auditory ossicle. In the auditory ossicles. Okay, inside the ear we have three types of bones: malleus, incus, and stapes. So in each ear we have one malleus, one incus, and one stape. So in 2 ears we have double. Okay, that means 2 malleus, 2 incus, and 2 stapes. So total 6 bones are present in both of our ears. Okay, so these bones are not included in the skull bones. Okay, so you can make them part of the skull or not, but the 22 bones that we have said are present in the skull do not consist of this hyoid bone and the 6 bones of the ears. Okay, so these bones are counted separately. Now let's have a look at the diagram. So you can see this diagram of the skull region. Many type of bones are shown here. Now the bones which are present inside the blue boxes, these are the 8 bones in the cranial. Okay, cranial bones, 8 cranial bones. So I have put them inside the boxes to differentiate them from the facial bones. So the bones which are not present inside the blue boxes are the facial bones. So these are facial bones. And the bones which are present inside the blue boxes are the cranial bones. Okay, so what are the cranial bones? You can see, let's start from the right hand side. One ethmoid bone. So one ethmoid bone. Then sphenoid. One sphenoid bone. Then at the top you can see frontal bone. So one frontal bone. This side, on the left side, we have parietal bones. So how many parietal bones will be present? 2 parietal bones. Okay, so 2 parietal bones. Then temporal bones. Again 2 temporal bones. Okay, so let me write down 2 temporal bones and 1 occipital bone. Now here you can see 2 boxes. One box is showing the occipital bone and the other box is showing the occipital condyle. So actually the occipital condyles are part of the occipital bone. So you will have to count only one. So one occipital bone. One occipital. So can you see total how many bones are there? One ethmoid, one sphenoid, one frontal, then 2 parietal, 2 temporal, and 1 occipital. So total 8 bones. These are the 8 cranial bones. Okay. Now the condyles, how many condyles are there? Occipital condyles, 2 occipital condyles will be present. Okay. And these occipital condyles help in attaching the skull with the vertebral column. of our body. Okay, so the skull region articulates with the superior region of the vertebral column with the help of two occipital condyles. Therefore, the skull is said to be dicondylic. We say that the skull is dicondylic. It means that the skull consists of two condyles, two occipital condyles. Okay, and these two occipital condyles are part of the occipital bone. Therefore, we just count one occipital bone, right? So the skull was one part of the axial skeleton. The other part is vertebral column, which is located at the back side of our body or the dorsal side of our body. And the vertebral column consists of 26 bones. Each of these bones is known as vertebra. Vertebra. The plural form is vertebrae. Vertebrae. Okay, so total 26 vertebrae are present, which are serially arranged like this. So this is one vertebra. Then on the bottom side, there is another vertebra, one more vertebra, and like this total there will be 26 vertebra on the top of each other. Okay, so they will form a series. So these are serially arranged vertebrae. Total how many? 26 vertebrae which are serially arranged, and these are placed dorsally, that means on the back side of our body, and the vertebral column may act as the main framework of the trunk. Okay, so they make the main framework of the trunk region. They extend from the base of the skull. So suppose this is the skull. These vertebral column, only one vertebral column is present, which consists of 26 vertebra. It starts at the base of the skull and then it continues downward. Okay. Each vertebra also has a central hollow portion. So we have seen that, see, 26 vertebra will be serially arranged. In the middle, these vertebra will have a small hole, okay, or opening, so that the nerve cord, okay, or the spinal cord can continue in them. Okay, so the spinal cord runs in between the vertebral column, and therefore the vertebra have small hollow portions or openings so that the spinal cord can pass through them. Okay. So this hollow portion is known as neural canal, and this is for the passage of the spinal cord. So you can see that the spinal cord is well protected inside the vertebra of the vertebral column, right? What are the functions of the vertebral column? Obviously, the protection of the spinal cord. It is well protected inside the vertebrae. Then it also provides support to the head region because it starts at the base of the skull. So it provides the support to the head region, and it also acts as the point of attachment for the ribs and the musculature of the back. Okay, so the ribs which are present on the sides, these ribs are connected to the sternum at the front side, and on the back side these are connected to the vertebral column. Okay, so this is also the point of attachment for the ribs and the musculature of the back. Now we have seen that total 26 bones or 26 vertebra are present in the vertebral column, right? So what are the names of these vertebra? So different vertebra have different names. So the first 7 vertebra are known as cervical vertebra, which are present in the neck region. So if you touch the back side of your neck, you will feel small bones there. Okay, these bones are the first 7 bones of the vertebral column from C1 to C7, and these are known as cervical vertebra. Okay, and then just below the neck region will start the thoracic vertebra. These are 12 in number, T1 to T12, and these are present in the mid back, okay, mid of your back, and these are connecting to the ribs. So the ribs which are connecting to the vertebral column on the back side, they will be connecting to which vertebrae? They will be connecting to the thoracic vertebrae, okay, not to the cervical vertebrae, because cervical vertebra is present in the neck region and the rib is present below it, right? So the ribs are connected to the thoracic vertebra, that you have to remember. And below the thoracic vertebra, that means in the lower back, the vertebra are known as lumbar vertebra. These are 5 in numbers. So total 5 lumbar vertebra are present, and these are the largest vertebra. Okay, so the size of the vertebra are also different. And then one sacral vertebra and one coccygeal vertebra is present. So both the sacral vertebra and the coccygeal vertebra consist of large means more than one bones, but with these bones are fused together to form one bone. Okay, so in the sacral vertebra, 5 bones are fused into one sacrum. Okay, so these are counted as one, and these are present in the pelvis region, whereas the coccygeal vertebra consists of 4 bones fused into one bone. Okay, and this is present in the tailbone. Okay, so let's revise this again. Total 26 vertebrae are present in the vertebral column. The first 7 are known as cervical vertebra. These are present in the neck region. Okay. Then the next 12 are known as thoracic vertebra. These are present in the mid back, and these are the vertebra to which the ribs are attached. Then lower to the thoracic vertebra, we will have 5 lumbar vertebra which are present in the lower back. So touch your lower back and feel these lumbar vertebra. And then below that we have the pelvis region. So the vertebra at that region are known as sacral vertebra. There is only one sacral vertebra, although it consists of 5 bones, but these 5 bones are fused into one sacrum. Okay, so these are counted as one. Similarly, coccygeal also, there is only one coccygeal which consists of 4 bones fused into one. Okay, so sacral and the coccygeal will be counted as one each. Now we have the diagram. You can see cervical vertebra, then 12 thoracic vertebra, 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, then 1 sacrum and 1 coccyx. Total how many? 26. So total 26 vertebrae are present in the vertebral column. Okay. You can see these ribs attached to the thoracic vertebra in the middle region. Can you see this? Now let's proceed. So we have discussed about the skull region. Then in the middle part, that is in the trunk region, we have discussed about the backward part, that is the vertebral column. Now let's come to the front part, that is sternum. So the front part consists of the sternum, which is a T-shaped bone. T-shaped, single T-shaped bone, flat bone. It is a flat bone on the ventral midline of the thorax. So if you touch at the middle of your chest, you will feel a flat bone. That bone is nothing but the sternum. Okay. And then we come to the last part of the axial skeleton, that is the ribs. There are total 12 pairs of ribs, and these pairs of ribs are present on both the sides, okay, of our body. So these are thin, flat bones which are connected dorsally to the vertebral column. That means on the back side they are connected to the vertebral column, and on the front side, that is ventrally, they are connected to the sternum. Okay. Now, on the dorsal end, it has 2 articulation surfaces. Therefore, the ribs are known to be bicephalic. Why do we say that the ribs are bicephalic? Because they have 2 articulation surfaces on the dorsal end. Now let's have a look at this diagram. This diagram will explain you everything. This is a self-explanatory diagram. You can see all the 12 pairs of ribs here. Okay, this front bone that I am going to shade in the blue color is the sternum. Okay, so can you see this blue colored flat bone on the front side? This is the sternum. This is T-shaped like this. Okay, so this T-shaped bone is sternum. Now let's see the first 7 ribs. You can see the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these 7 ribs are known as true ribs. Okay, why they are known as true ribs? Because these are connected to the sternum on the front side directly. So all the ribs have to connect to the sternum either directly or indirectly. So the ribs which connect to the sternum directly are known as true ribs, and the ribs which connect the sternum indirectly are known as false ribs. Okay, so the first 7 ribs are known as true ribs. Dorsally they are connected with the thoracic vertebra, okay, of the vertebral column. Ventrally they are connected to the sternum directly. So you can see these are touching the sternum directly, and these are connected with the sternum with the help of a cartilage known as hyaline cartilage. Okay, so which cartilage is present here? Hyaline cartilage is present. So you have understood why they are known as true ribs, because these are connected to the sternum directly. Now here the next ribs, rib number 8, rib number 9 and rib number 10. So 8, 9 and 10, these you can see these are not joining the sternum directly. These have joined the 7th rib. Okay, so see, first rib, second rib, third rib, fourth rib, fifth rib, sixth and seventh. These are joining the sternum. But the rib number 8, 9 and 10, these are not joining the sternum directly. Instead, they have joined the 7th rib. And through the 7th rib, they have joined the sternum. So these are joining the sternum indirectly with the help of the 7th rib. Therefore, these are known as false ribs, okay? Because these are not connected to the sternum directly. And these are also known as vertebrochondral ribs, okay? So the false ribs are also known as vertebrochondral ribs. How many ribs are there? False ribs? 3. 8. The rib number 8, rib number 9 and rib number 10. Okay, again they will join the 7th rib with the help of a cartilage known as hyaline cartilage. Okay, and the last two ribs, that means the rib number 11th and rib number 12, these are not connecting with the sternum either directly or indirectly. So their ends are free. They are not connecting to anything on the front side. Therefore, these are known as floating ribs. Okay. So I hope you have understood this diagram. If you want to take the screenshot, you can take this. Okay. Now let's come to what is rib cage. So we have seen that on the sides we have the ribs. These ribs are connected to the sternum on the front side, and on the back side they are connected to the vertebral column. Okay, so which part of the vertebral column is connected with the ribs? It is thoracic vertebra, the 12th thoracic vertebra. So the thoracic vertebra, ribs and sternum together form a cage-like structure, and this is known as rib cage. Okay, so the rib cage consists of which vertebra? Thoracic vertebra, then ribs, and then sternum at the front. Okay, cervical vertebra, lumbar vertebra, these are not part of the rib cage. Okay. Now this was about the axial skeleton. That means the skeletal system along the axis. Now we will discuss the appendicular skeleton, the part of the skeleton that is on the sides. That means 2 hands and 2 legs. Okay. So the appendicular skeleton consists of the bones of the limbs, that means the bones of the hands and legs, along with the associated girdles. So what are girdles? These are the bones which help in the articulation or attachment of the limbs with the main part of the body, that is the trunk of the body. Okay, so the bones which help in the attachment of hands with the body are known as pectoral girdle, and the bones which help in the attachment of the legs with the body are known as pelvic girdle. So you will study about 2 types of girdles here, pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle. Pectoral girdle is related to the hands, attachment of the hands, and pelvic girdles are associated with the attachment of the legs. Okay. So first let's discuss about the hands and the associated girdle, that is the pectoral girdle. So on the left side we have the diagram showing you the hand. So here you see the upper part is showing the clavicle and the scapula, which are part of the girdle that is known as pectoral girdle. Okay. So these two are part of the pectoral girdle. First we will see the bones of the hands that are shown inside the blue colored boxes. So these bones, you can see the uppermost bone of the hand is humerus. So one humerus is there. Then in the middle part, this part of the hand, we have 2 bones, radius and ulna. So one radius, one ulna. And then we have wrist bones. So total 8 wrist bones are present. These are known as carpals. Then the bones which are present in the palm region are known as metacarpals, and the bones which are present in the fingers or digits are known as phalanges. Okay. So carpals, that means wrist bones. Total how many carpals are there? 8 carpals are there. Okay. So 8 wrist bones. Then 5 metacarpals, that means 5 palm bones, and 14 phalanges. That means 14 bones are present in the fingers. Okay, so 14 phalanges, 5 metacarpals, 8 carpals, 1 radius, 1 ulna and 1 humerus. If you add them all, you will get 30. So in one hand we have 30 bones. Okay, each hand consists of 30 bones. Now we will see the pectoral girdle. So we have already seen in the diagram that the pectoral girdle consists of the 2 parts called scapula and the clavicle. Okay. So what are pectoral girdle? They help, these are the bones which help in the attachment of the upper limbs, that means the hands, with the axial skeleton or the trunk of the body. Okay, each half of the pectoral girdle consists of two parts. Each half means one half on the right side and the other hand on the left side. So the right hand is attached with one half of the pectoral girdle and the left hand is attached with the left half of the pectoral girdle. Okay, so each half of the pectoral girdle, that means you can consider any one side, there are two parts. First one is scapula and the second one is clavicle. So clavicle is very simple, the collar bones. You all must be knowing about the collar bones. If you touch at the collar region, you will feel long bones. Okay, so these long bones are the collar bones known as clavicle. Okay, these are long slender bones with two curvatures. And what is scapula? This is known as shoulder blade. So this part of the pectoral girdle, that is scapula, is present on the back side. So if you touch the back side of your shoulder, you will feel the presence of a flat triangular bone, that is scapula. Okay, this is a large triangular flat bone which is present on the dorsal part of the thorax. Okay, so on the back side here it is present between the second and the seventh rib. Okay, now let's have a look at the picture of these parts. So here you can see this one. In this figure you can see we have two bones. So one bone is like this. This is the collar bone, that is the clavicle, and the other bone is like this. Okay, can you see this long bone making an angle with the clavicle? And then here we have the flat triangular shaped, okay, bone. So this flat triangular shaped bone is known as scapula, that we have discussed right now. It is located at the back side of the thorax, back part of the thorax between the second and the seventh rib, and it is large and triangular in shape. Okay, now this shaded part that I'm shading, this is also part of this scapula. Now what is this? This is, so in the scapula, the dorsal part of the scapula has a slightly elevated ridge. So this is slightly elevated part of the scapula. This is known as spine. Okay, so the elevated part of the scapula which looks like a long bone is the spine. Okay, now you can see that the spine starts very narrow, but then it becomes wider. Okay, so as it moves from this side to this side, it becomes wider. Okay, so this spine continues as a wider or expanded part, and this expanded part of the spine here is known as acromion or acromion process. Okay, so this elevated ridge on the scapula is known as spine. This spine continues as an expanded process known as acromion. Okay, so spine, the shape of the spine is like that, like this. It starts very narrow, but then it continues and becomes wider, and the end part is the wider part. Okay, this wide part of the spine is known as acromion or acromion process. Okay, and this acromion part of the spine is attached with the collarbone, that is the clavicle. Okay, so you can see that the clavicle and the acromion part of the spine are connected, right? Now let's have a look at another diagram. So this diagram, this colorful diagram that you see. Okay, so here you can see the acromion in green color. You can see this green color part is the acromion, that is the wider part of the spine. This complete part is the spine, and this flat triangular part is the scapula. The elevated ridge is the spine, and it progresses or continues as a wider expanded part known as acromion. Now just below the acromion you can see there is a depression or a cavity known as glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. Okay, so this is glenoid cavity. It is this cavity at which the hand will get attached at the shoulder. Okay, so this point of the glenoid cavity is also known as shoulder point. It is also known as shoulder point because the attachment of the humerus of the hand at this glenoid cavity will make the shoulder point. Okay, so this figure was not in your NCERT. I have added this to explain it to you. I want you to understand the things very clearly. Therefore, I have added these pictures. Now let's revise what we have just now seen. We have seen that the hands each hand consists of 30 bones, right? Humerus, radius, ulna, 3 bones, and then wrist bones then we have palm bones, and then phalanges. Okay, so carpals, the wrist bones; metacarpals, the palm bones, and the phalanges. So how many wrist bones are there? 8 wrist bones, then 5 palm bones, and then 14 phalanges. If you add them, you will get 30. Now, the bones which help in the attachment of the hand to the trunk or to the actual skeleton, these bones are known as girdle. Okay, so pectoral girdle, which help in the attachment of hand with the trunk. So the pectoral girdle consists of two parts again, clavicle and scapula. Clavicle is the collar bone, okay, on both the sides, and scapula is a large flat triangular shaped bone which is located at the dorsal part of the thorax, right? Now the scapula has a slightly elevated ridge that is known as spine. The spine starts very narrow, but then it becomes wider, and the end part of the spine is wide, and that is known as acromion, and this acromion attaches with the clavicle. Okay, and just below the acromion there is a depression or cavity called glenoid cavity, at which the hand will get attached, forming the shoulder point. Okay, now we come to the lower part, that means the legs and the associated girdle, that is pelvic girdle. So which girdle attaches the leg with the trunk? It is the pelvic girdle. And which girdle attaches the hand with the trunk? It is the pectoral girdle. Okay. So on the left side we have the diagram of the leg. Here you can see. First, have a look at the lower part of the leg, which is showing you the bones of the legs. So the bones which are enclosed inside the blue color boxes, you can see the uppermost bone, that is the bone of the thigh, is the femur. So the thigh bone is known as femur. This is the longest bone of our body. Okay, longest bone. Then here you can see patella, which is a knee bone. Okay, it is located at the knee. Then below that you have two bones, tibia and fibula, just like the radius and ulna of the hands. So here also we have two bones in the middle part, tibia and fibula. And then at the lowest part you can see tarsals, 7 tarsals are there, 5 metatarsals and 14 phalanges. Okay, so the tarsals are the ankle bones, just like the carpals of the wrist bones. Then metatarsals, the middle part of that means this part. Okay, this part. And then 14 phalanges, that means the 14 bones present in the finger regions, toes region. Okay, so 7 ankle bones are there, that means 7 tarsals are there, 5 metatarsals and 14 phalanges. So again, if you add them, femur, 1 patella, 1 tibia, 1 fibula, and then 7 tarsals, 5 metatarsals and 14 phalanges, you will get 30 bones. So each leg consists of 30 bones. Okay, now what is the girdle which attaches the leg with the trunk? That is the pelvic girdle. So now we will study about the pelvic girdle. Pelvic girdle helps in the articulation or attachment of the lower limb, that is the leg, with the axial skeleton. We already know this. Now it is formed of 2 coxal bones. The pelvic girdle is made up of 2 coxal bones. So here you can see the coxal bones. 2 coxal bones are there. 1 coxal bone on each side. One on the left side and the other on the right side. So here you can see 1 coxal bone. This is 1 coxal bone. Now each coxal bone consists of 3 parts, or the 3 types of bones: ilium, pubis and ischium. Okay, so you can see ilium, pubis and ischium. These are the 3 parts or 3 bones of the coxal bone. Okay, so these 3 bones are fused together to form 1 coxal bone, right? Ilium, pubis and ischium. Okay, ilium, pubis and ischium. And then at the point of the fusion of these 3, there is a cavity called acetabulum. Okay, so what is acetabulum? It is a cavity at the fusion of the 3 bones, ilium, ischium and pubis, to which the thigh bone articulates. So the hand, we have seen that the hand articulates with the trunk at a cavity known as glenoid cavity. Similarly, here also the thigh bone of the leg will articulate with the trunk at the cavity known as acetabulum. Okay, and the 2 halves of the pelvic girdle meet ventrally to form the pubic symphysis, which is made up of fibrous cartilage, which consists of fibrous cartilage. Okay, so this was about the appendicular skeleton. Now we have completed the skeletal system. Okay, now we know that joints are also very important in the movement. If joints will not be present, then the movement is not possible. Okay, so here the force which is exerted by the muscle will help in the movement only if joints are present, that will act as the fulcrum. Okay, what are joints? These are the points of contact between the bones or between the bones and the cartilage. Now what is fulcrum? So let me give you an example of the swing known as seesaw. So you have seen the seesaw in the parks. So seesaw is something like this. One side it is upside and the other side it is on the downward side, and it is attached to the ground with the help of a point. With the help of something, it is attached to the ground. Now if someone sits on this point, then this side will go down and this side will come upwards. Okay, now two people sit on both the sides of the seesaw. Now it depends which part is having more pressure or more force. Okay, so the person who will be exerting more force, that person will go downwards, and the person who will be exerting lesser force will come upward. Okay, so the force is very important for the movement of seesaw, but the presence of this triangular part which is attaching this seesaw with the ground is also important. So this point is the fulcrum. Okay, got it? So if the fulcrum will not be present, then there will be no movement of the seesaw. So the pressure is also important, or the force is important. At the same time, the fulcrum is also important. So the force is exerted by the muscle and the joints act as the fulcrum. So they together help in the movement. Okay. And the joints can be classified into three different types. First one is the fibrous joint, second one is the cartilaginous joint, and the third one is the synovial joint. Okay, or synovial joint. So the first one, that is the fibrous joints, are the joints which do not allow any movement. So no movement is allowed in the by the fibrous joints. These are present in the flat skull bones of the cranium. So suppose this is the cranium, it consists of the flat bones. These are attached so tightly that they do not allow any movement. Okay, then the second type of the joint is cartilaginous joint. Obviously it will consist of the cartilage, right, and they will allow limited movement. The fibrous joints do not allow any movement, no movement, and the cartilaginous joints allow movement, but the movement is very limited. So limited movement. These are present between the adjacent vertebra in the vertebral column. So our vertebral column consists of 26 serially arranged vertebra like this. Okay, and between these two vertebra, cartilage is present which attaches them. Okay, so these allow limited movement. That means we can stand straight, we can bend down. Okay, because these are cartilaginous joints, right? But the movement is quite limited. Okay, then the last type of joint is the synovial or synovial joint that allows considerable movement. Here there is no limit on the movement, there is considerable movement, and they are characterized by the presence of the fluid filled cavity between the articulating surfaces. And what is the reason for the considerable movement? The reason is the fluid filled cavity, which allows the movement, the easy movement, okay, between the articulating surfaces of the two bones. So the presence of the fluid filled cavity allows considerable movements in these joints. Okay. Now there are many examples of this type of joint. First one is the ball and socket joint, which is present between the humerus and the pectoral girdle. Humerus is part of the uppermost part of the hand, right? And pectoral girdle is the bone which help in the attachment of the humerus with the trunk. So between these two, the joint that is present is known as ball and socket joint. That means shoulder joint. It is present in the shoulder region. Shoulder region. Okay. Then hinge joint, which is the knee joint. Okay. Hinge joint is also known as knee joint. Then pivot joint. It is present between the atlas and the axis. What is atlas? This is the first vertebra. If you remember, this is the first vertebra of the vertebral column. Okay, vertebral column. So we know that the occipital condyle of the skull region is attached or articulated with the vertebral column with the help of the first vertebra. Okay, so it is the first vertebra of the vertebral column, that is atlas, which connects or which is attached to the occipital condyle of the skull region. Okay, then the next type of joint is gliding joint. This is the example of the last type of joint, synovial joint. Okay. So gliding joint is present between the carpals. What are carpals? Wrist bones, right? How many wrist bones are there? 8 wrist bones or 8 carpals are there. So between the wrist bones, which type of joint is present? Gliding joint is present. Therefore, we can move our hand like this. Then saddle joint, the last example, it is present between the carpal and the metacarpal. That means between the wrist and the this palm bones, okay, of the thumb. Carpals and metacarpals of the thumb. So the metacarpals are present here. There are bones which help in the attachment of the fingers to the palm. Okay. So at this point we have the metacarpal. So between the metacarpal of the thumb and the carpal, there is a joint called saddle joint, right? So this was all about the joints. Now we come to the last topic, that is the disorders of the muscular and skeletal system. So there are some disorders. In each chapter we are discussing the disorders. So the first one is the myasthenia gravis. What is myasthenia gravis? It is an autoimmune disorder that affects the neuromuscular junction. What is neuromuscular junction? The point at which the neurons are connected with the muscles. Okay. So the neurons bring the signal from the central nervous system and bring at this point, that is the neuromuscular junction. Okay. And what are the effects of this disorder? It leads to fatigue, weakening and paralysis of the skeletal muscle. Second type of disorder is muscular dystrophy. It is progressive degeneration of the skeletal muscle, mostly due to the genetic factors. Okay. So the reason is genetic here. Muscular dystrophy can be caused genetically. The next type of disorder is tetany, that is rapid spasm or wild contraction in the muscle due to low calcium ions in the body. Okay, so if the amount of calcium ion is low in your body, it can cause tetany, that is rapid spasm or wild contraction in the muscles. Now the next one is arthritis. So arthritis is inflammation of the joints. Most of you would be aware about this disorder. Then the next is osteoporosis. Osteoporosis, that is in an age-related disorder. Okay, it is caused due to decreased bone mass. So suppose this is bone. Bone has certain mass, okay, inside it. So if the bone mass is decreased, it leads to the weakening of the bone, right? So if the bones will get weakened, then there will be increased chances of the fractures. So decreased bone mass and increased chances of fractures. Okay. And what is the cause of osteoporosis? It is lower levels of estrogen. Okay, so lower levels of estrogen can cause osteoporosis. Now the last type of disorder is gout, which is inflammation of the joints. So if there is inflammation in the joints, it will be gout, and it is due to the accumulation of the uric acid crystals. So inflammation of the joints due to the accumulation of the uric acid crystal leads to the gout. Okay. And arthritis is also an inflammation of the joints. Okay, so here we complete this chapter. I hope you have understood this chapter well, because I've tried to explain it in the best possible way. But even if you have any doubt, you can please feel free to mention your doubts in the comment section. And we will be back with the next session soon with the next chapter, that is neural control and coordination. Till then, keep learning, keep scoring high. Thank you so much.